years ago, I took the leap and left my corporate job to pursue my entrepreneurial dreams. And today I'm walking you through what that looked like and lessons I've learned along the way. Hi, I'm Holly Haynes. I'm a business strategist, and I help you build a life priorities focused business without relying on the social media algorithm. So in this episode, I'm diving into what I have done over the past couple years to go from corporate life to entrepreneurship, including overcoming the fear and doubt, what that looked like for our family, the challenges of entrepreneurship, the ups and downs, and the 1-year challenge we gave ourselves, the importance of setting boundaries, and finally, the power of community and support. And of course, I'll include some lessons learned along the way and ways that you can stay focused on your goals. So whether you're a budding entrepreneur starting to think about your next steps or ready to take the jump into full-time entrepreneurship, this lesson and podcast is for you. Welcome back to this week's pep talk. Okay, so first things first, this year, one of our goals was to launch a YouTube channel. It's at Holly Marie Haynes. And if you're watching the video, we've sort of changed around the background a little bit. So you'll have to check it out. I'm still playing around with it. But the goal is that we've got this more of a studio vibe in 2025. We're not quite there yet, but check it out if you haven't checked out our YouTube channel. It's really fun, and we put some bonus videos out there. But today, specifically every time of year, this time of year, I get a little sentimental because I can remember down to the hour when I set up the meeting with my boss to put in my notice. And so we are celebrating year 3. So 3 years ago, this week at this time, I set up the meeting to put in my notice to my full-time corporate job after 22 years. Working full-time, right? So I thought in honor of this anniversary, I would share a couple of things that I think about when this sort of anniversary comes around. And that is, number one, why I never thought it was possible ever, all of those initial fears and doubts that I had. Number two, some of the biggest challenges that we have had as an entrepreneurial family. Number three, some unexpected lessons that we've learned along the way. There's always lessons learned. And number four, the biggest wins and what I would do now and what I would do differently. So I said it at the beginning, and I'll start by saying I did not believe in a million years that I would ever be able to replace my corporate salary with a business that I created. No one in my family is entrepreneurs. I didn't even really know the word. I always joke that I'm old and the major entrepreneurship did not exist when I was in college. So it was very, very different. It's a very different path than anything that I was ever taught. And so the first step in this whole journey was mindset. And honestly, it wasn't my mindset that flipped first. It was actually my husband's. And earlier this week, we were talking to some amazing women who have now joined our collective co-op. And sometimes we have calls with those of you who are interested in the co-op and your families. And so we actually had a call with one of my clients and her husband, and we were sort of just sharing our story behind the scenes of what we were doing and how we were doing it. And that's something that I take really, really to heart. And I don't think a lot of people do that. And honestly, I feel like that is my intention with this podcast and our programs, is to start sharing more behind the scenes. But going back to this whole mindset flip, what it was me starting to share behind the scenes with my husband. So I started, instead of going upstairs and just shutting the door and be like, I have to work for 2 hours or whatever the thing was, I started to share, this is why I'm building this workshop. This is why I'm recording this podcast. This is what happens when the podcast is recorded. This is where this funnel will lead to. And he started watching the workshops behind the scenes with me and eventually ended up going on a retreat with me. And so when he saw other entrepreneurs, again, because we didn't grow up with this the way that it is now. And when he saw other people that had been successful, he was the first one that said, "Why are you still working?" And I remember him saying that. I can remember what I was wearing, where we were at, and I was just like, "What? What do you mean?" And so keep in mind that Scott actually stayed home with because I have twins. So 2 babies in daycare was like insane. And it just made sense for me to keep working. So for me to leave my corporate job meant figuring out full-time income, full-time benefits, how to support a family of 4. At the time, my stepdaughter was also still living with us. So a family of 5. And in today's economy, like it was a lot. So it kind of made my head spin until it didn't. And the first step, going back to my first point, was believing it was possible, right? So what we did is I was like, okay, like, what do you mean? And so we sat down and we mapped it out. And what it looked like was, what would it take to support our family for 1 year? So it's like, let's just take 1 year at a time. If I'm being really honest, the biggest challenge was insurance. We could do a whole dang podcast on this, but medical insurance in the United States, and I'm not being political, is a lot. And for 100% entrepreneurial family, it is insanity, like insanity. It is so expensive. And so we had to map out, if I did not bring in 1 cent of income in my business, which I hoped wasn't the case, how could we live for 1 year? And we did it this way because I didn't want to wake up in the morning thinking like, oh gosh, I have to sell 17 things today. And I didn't want to wake up every single morning knowing that I wasn't going to a job now to be like, oh, I'm so nervous. I'm so scared. Like I wanted to step into it with this like mindset of, yes, we can do it. We have a plan. We're going to follow the plan and feel really energetically aligned with it. So I also knew that I wanted to grow, but I wanted to grow in a very organic way. And I wanted to be able to prioritize like the joy of, hey, I said I wanted to put my kids on the bus and I get to, and I wanted to be able to enjoy that. So that was step 1, was the mindset, and then mapping it out. And again, going into the details without sharing all the details as the biggest challenge for us was medical care. And I should do a whole podcast and maybe even bring an expert on this, because it is our biggest family expense to date, right? To date. Like we're going through it right now through open enrollment and figuring out like what makes the most sense. And it is stressful. So that was challenge number 1. And honestly, like it is what it is. There's no way around it. The other challenge, which really wasn't a challenge, but I wanted to go into it with eyes wide open, was sometimes increasing your income isn't making more money, right? So it was really thinking about, well, what can we do to save money? Or what can we do that is outside of my business to make more money or to spend less? So really looking at our family income as like a big picture of expenses, stock, retirement, what medical plans are we investing in? And like, how do we spend less? Does it look different for 1 year, knowing that the other side of it, we would have something different, right? So the other third piece of the formula is I wanted to invest a certain amount back into the business. So we combined how much we would personally put into the business along with some boundaries, right? So we knew like each month we were going to attempt to pay ourselves this much, but we were going to take a percentage of it and keep it in the business so that I could continue to invest in scaling the business. That's also another episode. We have a whole formula that we follow. But the challenge here and the last piece of it was actually on me, and that was the corporate unraveling, as I call it. And so for 22 years, it was more work meant more success. So if you worked more, you made more, you got more rewards, you got promoted, everyone loved you. If you worked less, you were considered lazy. And so it was really, really hard to flip that entire model in basically one day. Like I woke up January 1st and was like, I'm not going to work today. And so it has taken a full 3 years now to convince myself that my worth is not tied to how much I work. It's not tied to the job title or the amount of work that I do each week. And I write down every day in my journal that is tied to my impact, right? And it's super weird because, I joke on this podcast a lot that I talk about, what I do to you and to listeners and to my clients. But like, I think my family still thinks I sell planners. Like our neighbors and friends will never ask us what we do because it's not normal. It's not like standardized. Like they don't know what questions to ask. And so I had to like get it straight in my head that it's okay that not everyone understands the lifestyle that we're trying to create. And so I think that's where the last, it'll be 3 years in January has been so amazing because I rarely miss a bus pickup or drop off. I sport the same leggings and sweatshirts every single day. And that makes me so happy because I'm not having to spend time getting dressed up. We've traveled to over 15 countries and counting as a family. And our goal is to still travel once a quarter, which I share pretty openly. But here's the piece that I didn't expect. And this was like getting into the reflections of what happened as I sort of unraveled myself. And that is my body, my physical body, like completely broke down after the stress of leaving the corporate world. And it didn't happen right away, but the schedule, the stress, like when I created the capacity, the free time to heal, I actually broke first. And so what this means is, when you're building a business and working full time and you have young kids, I mean, I was maybe averaging like 5 hours of sleep. I now average 9. So at the beginning, I was sick a lot. Like you'll hear it in the first couple of podcast episodes. Like I lost my voice all the time. I had a lot of health issues that just were like hidden by the busy is what I would call it. And so it's taken me a minute to recognize that and now incorporate things that have helped me recover from the busy of working that much, right? So what did it look like? I mean, it's little tiny things now. Like I prioritize eating lunch. I cook a lot more. I sleep more. I have way less screen time. We go full weekends or weeks without working. And in this scenario, this was something that I hadn't done in 20 years, right? So my body literally broke down. And you can even see it, like if you look back at pictures on my website, like you can see the, the fullness of my face. Like I haven't gained or lost a ton of weight, but you can see it. Like you can see the difference of the inflammation and how I've healed over the last couple of years. And so I really had to convince myself every single morning that I was a good person, even if I didn't get up at 5 a.m. and start working, because that's what I had always done. And I also had to learn other ways to cope, right? Some of which have included learning more about me. So I've invested time and money into learning my human design and really learning why I'm programmed to think certain ways, which is something that I'm really proud of to have incorporated into our strategic programs, because I believe that strategy is not just numbers and process flows. It's also how do you feel? What do you want to be? And taking the time to get to know your own personality. I had never had time or the capacity to do this before. And so as I think about these reflections on leaving corporate, my questions to you are, what are you doing to learn more about yourself, right? So it took a minute for me, but I had to shed a layer of skin to get down to the core of who I was, which has included a lot of therapy, but also included the capacity, the white space, which you hear me talk about all the time. If you aren't busy all the time, who are you? And for a while, I could not answer that. And I feel like for the first time, probably maybe in November of this year is when I was oh, I can answer that now. It took so long for me to unravel and sort of relearn who I wanted to be. So my question to you is when you aren't working, what are you? And I couldn't answer those questions. And so it was really important for me to create a space in our business model where I could honor that, but also I could teach my clients to honor this. So as I'm recording this podcast, we're actually hosting our virtual retreat for our co-op members. And the virtual retreat, the name of it is called Strategy and Soul. And we do it at the end of the year, every year. And the goal is that we're bringing in the strategy, the piece that I talk about a lot, the flowcharts, the numbers, the revenue, but then we're bringing in the soul. And that's honestly what this episode is about, is the reflections on who are you really if you aren't tied to your work? What does that look like for you? And so that's something that I'm really, really proud of, but something that I'm still learning. And I don't think that would have come out if I hadn't created the time to really think about these questions. And so I feel like my biggest win and going into 2025 is I've spent more time with myself than ever. therapy, yoga, Pilates, healthcare, date nights, travel, sleep, fun. And I found my voice without losing my voice, like physically losing my voice. Like I've been able to shed my corporate skin. I think you can like feel it and hear it. And you can even see it if you look at old pictures. And I'm really leaning in to my 2025 more confident self, which is hard to say after so much change. But I share this because I get asked a lot, like, what is it like leaving corporate? What did you do? Do you even think it's possible? And so I do think it's 100% possible, but it doesn't necessarily have to be leaving corporate. It could be like whatever that big, scary dream is for you. And I think when you think things are impossible, they are. When you think they're possible, they are. And so even though the path might be unfamiliar, doesn't mean that it's not possible, right? So it's always like the path less traveled is way more exciting anyways, right? So as you're listening to these reflections, I would love for you to think of questions to really help you reflect on where you've been, but also where you're going. And so that is like, if I were to do it different, what would I do again? And the answer for me is nothing, except I wish I would have done it earlier. I wish I would have had more people around me to tell me it's possible. I have completely surrounded myself by women who believe in me, and that's been made such a big difference. And I wish that I would have invested in myself to believe it's possible earlier. So who are you surrounding yourself by? How are you spending your time? And when you drop the busy, who are you, right? So I hope this podcast and this community can provide that for you, but also, it's the end of the year. I think it's a great time to go celebrate your wins this week, celebrate how far you have come, and celebrate the big things and the small things, right? And don't be afraid to dream bigger. If you have questions about what it took for me to leave my corporate job or any questions about behind the scenes, feel free to reach out and I will see you next week.